All right, so split fountain. This is going to be one of two videos, maybe even a third. I've got 3 layers burned to the screen. This big flat is the one I'm going to print first. You can see I've got my Artex sheet taped down already, getting ready for my registration. First thing I want to do is go ahead and I want to block out this layer right there by just barely covering it with a piece of newsprint, because the squeegee itself will not be running over that. I just don't want any spatters to happen. It's really important when you're doing a split fountain that you have an adequate amount of space on the screen above and below the image, because we're going to be mixing ink on screen with the squeegee. And to do that, we can't just have some tiny little bit of space. If the other image were really close, I could use packing tape instead to cover that, and that works. You have to put the packing tape down on the screen on the top before there's any moisture on it. No ink and no moisture. It has to be completely dry. And it has to be down really flat, no folds, no dog ears, blah, blah, blah. But I don't recommend that. I recommend burning your screen so that you've got enough space between layers for the squeegee to work. This is about borderline. I wouldn't want anything less than 6 inches, okay? Now the reason I've set up the screen and this block for me to print this way is because I'm actually going to print this layer twice. I'm going to do 2 split fountains. And the nature of a split fountain is I'm going to have one color on one side of the screen and another color here, and I'm going to mix with the squeegee to create a blend, which is really cool. But that blend is limited by the direction of the squeegee. So if the squeegee is going to go this way, the blend is going to be happening top to bottom. If the squeegee went this way, the blend is going to be happening side to side. I can't do both in any one layer. So here's what I'm going to do. The first layer, the squeegee is going to go this way, and it's going to be a tiny bit of 2 different colors on each side with a whole bunch of white. And the white is more opaque. This is a base layer. And then the second layer, the squeegee is going to go this way, and instead of white being the base, the transparent base is going to be the base with 2 small quantities of color at either side. And I'm going to print that in perfect registration. What's going to result is a kind of an infinite rainbow shift in the colors you're seeing in that background. Because here you'll have magenta to cyan, very light, but here to here you'll have, I'll probably use like green and orange. That green, very transparent, and that orange, very transparent, will be modifying the magenta and the cyan underneath. So that's how we'll get that crazy color shift. Now this squeegee, when I'm printing this way, this squeegee is not long enough. I need 2 inches past the image on either side. So that's a 12-inch. So I'm going to grab a 14-inch from over here. All right. So that's the minimum that I would want right there. Now, doing a split fountain, you do want to kind of think things through even a little bit more than you normally do, because I'm going to have this blend of one color to another on not only the screen but on the squeegee. So where I set the squeegee down becomes critical. I can't, when I set it down, I not only have to set it in the same place each time, I can't accidentally set it down like this, because that would completely screw up my blend. And because this corner is very close to the image, you can see that the ink is going to be sitting right there, so I'm not going to be able to just set it right there. So what are my other options? I could set it over there, but that's not really going to work for me based on where I'm standing. So sometimes I'll plan like, okay, I'm going to set the squeegee like that. Now if somebody's working here, that ain't going to work either. Maybe then I would have to walk around and set the squeegee over there. But I think since nobody's working here right now, that's going to work. I'm going to take the block and I'm going to make the screen level. Now another thing to think about is in this case, the squeegee has to run this way to get the blend that I want. But the hinges are here. And there are times that the screen's going to be lifted up. If my ink is really runny, that ink's going to run towards the hinges when it is up. So if I don't do a good flood stroke, if I leave ridges of ink here, that's really going to run. And that's going to totally screw up my blend. So the best thing with a split fountain is to always expose your screen so that the direction you're going to print is this way. Now the reason I can't with this is because, as I explained, I'm going to print this layer twice. So by definition, once is going to have to be like this for the transition from top to bottom. So for this, I knew I was going to have to accept it with one, so you're going to see me deal with that issue printing this first layer. The second layer, I'll be doing this, and it'll be easier. So when this one, I'll be very conscientious to always do a good flood stroke, because if I leave all the ink in that thicker frosting layer across the image, it's not going to run very much. It only runs when you leave a big ridge of ink somewhere. 2, I'm just going to keep an eye on it. 3, I'm not going to put a huge quantity of ink, because obviously the more ink that's there, the more it's going to run. Okay? All right, so I think we're ready. I'm going to start by putting down very small quantities of magenta and cyan. This is the top of the image, this is the bottom. The only reason that I'm allowing my registration pins to be way up here by the hinges is because if I had reversed the screen, I can't stand where that table is. So in this case, I'm allowing the registration pins to be up near the hinges, which is fine, it's just a little bit of an inconvenience. Now in this case, I really don't want a ton of saturation. In this case, for this split fountain, I want a fairly subtle shift from very off-white magenta to very off-white cyan. So I ain't using much. But I'm gonna put this color down in a kind of a wedge shape. The most color is going actually off the image, side to side. See that? That's it. So not much at all. Set it there. Some split fountains, people want like to pack on like every possible color, and you can do that, but that's not what I'm trying to do here. And sometimes I do that as well. You want to think about tinting strength too. You know, if you're going from one color to another, but you're using white as the base or even transparent base as the base, a color that's going to have a high tinting strength will require a lower volume. A color that has a weaker tinting strength will need more. So I want two things out of this magenta. One, I want the magenta to be a little more present in the image. than the cyan. But two, I also know that the magenta does not have quite as strong of a tinting strength, and so may need a little bit more in volume. Now I grab the white. I could be using transparent base for this. I'm using the white mainly because I want y'all to see through the videos or today what the difference is with using white opaque as a base and transparent base as a base. So now I'm going to use the white in a quantity that is appropriate for the printing I need to do. And with this, it's a kind of a balance that you want to strike. If I use too little ink, I could start to run out of ink before I finish my addition. And that's, especially when you're doing a split fountain, that's a bit of a problem, because I guarantee you, when you try to add more ink, it won't be the same. But if I add too much ink, it's going to be really hard to control, and the ink is going to migrate to the edges. It's going to run all over the place as well. So both can be real problems. Too little ink and too much ink. I have a fairly small image area, and I'm doing 8 prints. That's not a lot. This is probably more than enough ink. That's enough to do a good flood stroke, but it's not so much that I'm going to have a hard time controlling the ink on the screen and it's going to get messy, okay? So now the mixing, which is really central to split fountain. I'm going to kind of mime it first. I'm going to mix. One friend referred to this as chopping onions, which I thought was a pretty apt description. I'm going to mix like this, but then every few seconds I'm going to scrape the ink back together. And you want to watch closely how I'm using the squeegee to keep the ink kind of in one place while still mixing it and not letting it go all over the place. I never get the squeegee very close to the frame because that's going to just get ink all over the edge of the frame right there. I'm going to start on this side because the first ink that touches the squeegee blade I want to be the base, not the pure color. I want the pure color to get mixed up. Every once in a while I will actually scrape the squeegees clean and then continue to mix. I don't always do that. I do it if it's necessary. Because if there's unmixed ink on the squeegee blade, every once in a while that'll get pulled back into the ink and it'll create kind of a marbleizing spot in the print. So I'm going to start right there. The placement is important because every time I put the squeegee down, it needs to be in the same place. If I mess that up, I'm going to be messing with my blend. And I'm going to pull gently towards me. I'm going to start the mix. So you see those two colors start to mix in. And because I put the colors down in a blend, I'm already getting a nice blend from more saturated blue to a pure white to increasingly magenta. However, because I want, in this case, not always a split fountains, but in this case I want this blend to be really slow, really subtle. I want it to be an effect similar to the same wall colors appearing different because the light in the room is different, right? So to do that, while mixing, I'm going to do a little bit of side-to-side motion with the squeegee. Sometimes I do a lot, like I'll do these little figure eights side to side. See, now I'm going to bring the ink together. See how I do that? So it's a nice single ridge. And then mix some more side to side. Now bring the ink together. Mix. A little bit of side to side. Bring the ink together. Make sure your squeegee is staying pretty much centered to the image and correct if necessary. A little bit more side to side. I want this to be a real slow blend. And if you're mixing side to side, a little bit of side to side movement like that, always finish by just going front to back, because the side to side will leave some marbling. So then you want to finish just by going like this, no side to side, for a while. Generally speaking, if the blend looks really good like that, it's probably going to look good in the print, but not always or 100%. If you're going to do split fountain, this takes a lot of practice to get good at it. That's the only way I got decent at it, was by ruining a lot of prints. And it's a guarantee that one print to the next will not look exactly alike. You're going to screw up more prints. There's going to be a slight variation. The variation is fine. But the effect can be really magical. So it is totally worth it. It just takes a little bit of practice. Okay, when you think you've got it, now I'm going to flood. Leave no ridge. Okay? Now I need to print onto my Artex so that I can set registration. We're going to get a little louder. Make sure you set it down in the same place, or not like that, right? Now, mix. Before you flood, every time, you have to mix at least for a few seconds. You can't do more than a few seconds because the ink's going to dry. You literally have like 10 seconds to mix before you have to flood. If for some reason 10 seconds of mixing is inadequate, flood anyway, make the next print a new print, and then mix some more. There's my blend. So it looks good, right? Happy with the blend. Here's my mock-up. So the mock-up can go underneath the Artex. My Artex is a little bit too big for this print and placed rather poorly. When you think you've got it, engage the vacuum. Tape. I'm going to clean that. Let's check to see. So you can see that we had a little bit of ink running not much, because it's all in that frosting layer, there's no ridge. So the running is not bad. It's there, and if it gets much worse, it will affect our image, but it's not too bad. Now, if I'm feeling paranoid, I could switch to newsprint, or if I'm feeling confident, I can go directly to my good paper. One thing I definitely want to do is, now that I know where the good paper goes, I want to cover these other holes to increase the suction on the print. And off we go. Mix. Very fun. Oat cotton is super satisfying. It's like living on a diet of Fruit Loops. To be honest, I wanted the color here to be really noticeable for you. But if I were really doing this, I would say that's far too saturated for what I wanted. And that has nothing to do with what kind of image you might want to make. It just has to do, like, I want this to sort of convey the different light hitting the same wall and floor. And so this is really probably too much color for that. But it will make the demo make more sense. Thank you. See how I mix for at least a few seconds before every flood. there are times, and you want to throw the spatula, there are times that you need to bring some of this ink back in. To do that, I usually will scrape up that and then put it in again as a wedge. Because it's going to change my saturation level, it's going to change my blend. And you have to work with a lot more spatulas too. I will also sometimes find that the blend isn't looking exactly like I want. So I will change as I go. If I decided that this is too saturated, I might actually scrape up some ink and add more white. Or if it's not saturated enough, I just add some more saturated color and mix it in. If I'm changing on screen, I'm going to have to do a lot of mixing. That's going to mean that I need the proof on newsprint a few times. Okay? So where am I at? So this one's done.
Are we doing 8 prints here at this time?
Sorry?
8 prints this time?
Yes. So the flood always prepares the screen for the next print. So this print's going to be fine. But before I flood again, I need to mix for a long time because I changed those two inks. And you can see that it's not fully mixed in. I don't have time to fully mix it right now because I'm going to have ink drying on screen. So what I do instead is flood it, knowing that it's not mixed. I'll take that one out and I'll put in a newsprint. So if that looks good, or if I think I've got it, then go back to the good news. Okay, nice. Now you can, there's not much difference from print to print in the blend of these. So if you're trying to do a slow, gradual blend from one color to another, you can control that much easier than if you're trying to pack in a whole bunch of different colors into a small image area. If I'm trying to pack in a whole bunch of different colors split fountain, I have to accept that one print to the next is going to be different. The ink migrates out to the edges of the squeegee. So a lot of the ink out here is going to push that way. This blend in the middle is going to slowly grow and widen. So if I've got like 4 different colors there, it can work, but at a certain point it's going to change so much that I'm not going to like it anymore, probably. And at that point, I just have to scrape it up, clean the screen, start again, if I needed that large of an addition. And I'm not encouraging you to do that large of an addition now, anywhere close to it. So keep that in mind. Slower blend, easier to control. Very quick blend, harder to control. The mixing side to side that I was doing, you would not want to do that if you're trying to pack in a whole bunch of different colors. You would only mix front to back, not side to side at all. Now, one of the aspects of split fountain is, what do I do with that ink? I knew I was going to have some left over, because that's the nature of screen printing. I could sort of scrape this off, this side off, and put it into a light blue container. And I could sort of scrape this side off separately and put it into like a light magenta, kind of pinkish container. That's one possibility. Another possibility is to scrape it all up and I mix it together and I let it be an off-white kind of lavender. So some of it might depend on what I'm seeing here that I can add it to, because it's also not a great volume. What's there is not worth saving in its own new container. Here is a light blue. So that saves pretty easily. Now if I can find a pink. Yeah, that's going to work pretty well. Perfect. Nobody will ever know that we were even here. Okay? Otherwise, everything else is the same. Well, with the exception of one big difference that I'll talk briefly about. You know, normally I would say it's your option at this point. You can clean up the screen by taking it out of the clamps and taking it to the washout booth. Or you can clean up the screen by leaving it in the clamps, get a bucket of water and a sponge, and clean up here on press. Now what does that do? That ladder, what does that give you? That gives you a clean screen that has never lost its registration. Because this is going to be printed in 2 layers, maybe I should do that, because that could save me from having to reset my registration. Sounds good so far, but the first layer, the squeegee went this way. Second layer, the squeegee went this way. The fact is that the pressure of the squeegee stretches the screen. Now this is a fairly small image, so the stretching of the screen is fairly minimal, but it's still there. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to clean up on press so that I save my registration. But when I go to print this direction, I'm still going to have the Artex, and I'm going to double check my registration, because it could be that stretching the screen this way and stretching the screen that way could add up to being off. And I do want this to be dead on. We're going to do that in a second video, because I need to give the prints at least a little time to dry. Now if I were doing a second layer that was not the same image, just a different part of the image, I wouldn't have to wait. It's dry to the touch. I could print on them now already. The problem is, if I'm doing the exact same layer twice, I really want that dead on in registration. And right now, those prints are bigger than they were 10 minutes ago, because there's still moisture in them. Because paper, when it gets moisture in it, expands, and as it dries, it shrinks back down. So I need to give them a little more time to dry so they are the same size they were when I started to print this layer. Does that make sense? So we'll give that probably just about maybe 30 minutes, and then we'll shoot a second video. Thank you, Keely. You can stop there.